Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2018 AI in the Future of Work Congress. I'm Lori Glover, the Managing Director of Alliances at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and we're so happy this year again to be partnering with IDE, the Initiative on the Digital Economy, to bring this event here at Kresge. I have a few housekeeping announcements. The agenda for today's event is in this book. And the Twitter handle is on the front page. And if you want to tweet questions, you can do that as well. We do have microphones at both aisles. And when we do open up for questions from the audience, you can come down to the microphones. The table outside has more information on IDE, CSAIL, and other events at MIT. Then the last thing I have to say is this event is being filmed and photographed, so I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. And other than that, I'm going to get this started by welcoming Erik Brynjolfsson, who's a management professor at the MIT Sloan School, and he is the director of the Initiative for the Digital Economy. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you, Lori, and good morning. Good morning. So I'm, as Lori mentioned, I'm the director of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, and on behalf of us and also on CSAIL, I want to welcome you to this Future of Work Congress. We've seen some really big changes in technology and the economy recently, but we think the biggest changes are yet to come. So our team has pulled together an amazing lineup of experts to share their insights and opinions on the future of work. But before we look into the future, let's just take a brief look into the past, specifically back to March 2004. That's when there was an amazing spectacle in the Mojave Desert. $1 million prize was offered as part of the DARPA Grand Challenge to any self-driving car that could navigate a 150-mile course. But as it turned out, the best performer didn't even make it 1/20th of the way. Before it went off the road, there was this hairpin turn, and it went off into an embankment. In fact, one of the cars somehow managed to flip completely upside down before it got out of the starting gate, so that was impressive. It was really kind of a comedy of errors, and it's amazing to think that a little more than a decade after that, we started having self-driving cars cruising around the streets of many cities. In fact, this week, Google announced that they have self-driving cars with no safety driver in there has been approved by California, and a rumor has they've already been doing that in Arizona, where it was also approved. So a big part of the success of that story was the power of just stating clearly a goal that everyone could go to and attaching a prize to it. I remember actually myself how there were a lot of graduate students and assistant professors at MIT, and they were working nights and weekends, forgetting to eat and sleep, working towards this prize for in that case, the DARPA Urban Challenge, which was 3 years later. So humans can be incredibly dedicated and successful when we have a target in mind. But today, the main conversation about self-driving cars is no longer so much about the technology, it's really more about the social and economic challenges. Like, how difficult will it be for those taxi drivers and truck drivers to find new things to be doing in our economy, and entrepreneurs to find new enterprises for them to be involved in as self-driving cars start doing more and more of the driving? And how can we make sure that they are safe and deal with things like congestion and that there are fewer accidents? That same kind of conversation is happening in lots of other fields now as well, in medicine, in finance, in manufacturing, in agriculture, especially when it comes to technologies that are powered by machine learning systems, which is a type of AI. Today, machine learning systems are able to read medical images like these as well or better as dermatologists or radiologists. It says dermatologist level classification. Sebastian Thrun is actually being a little modest. If you read the paper itself, all the data show that the machine learning system is blowing away the human dermatologist, likewise with the radiologists. So does this mean that we're going to suddenly see these machine learning systems replace all the radiologists? I don't think so, and the panels will talk about that. But I do think that radiologists that are using machine learning systems will start replacing radiologists who aren't using machine learning systems. We're also beginning to see some economic impacts. It's still relatively early days, and so we're not seeing a big change in the productivity of the economy yet, but we do see some shoots in specific areas. A couple weeks ago, we came out with a paper looking at what's happening with international trade on eBay, and this chart shows that the introduction of machine translation in eBay led to a noticeable bump. They introduced it in a bunch of different pairs of languages. This is the pair for Spanish in Latin America. And you see beforehand, the orange and blue lines were sort of on top of each other. Sales were tracking each other. When they introduced machine translation, it allowed people in Latin America to read the postings of eBay in the United States in their native language much more easily. There was about a 17% bump in exports. So this simple turning on of machine translation had a material effect on international trade in that category. And again, we saw it in other categories as well. So more and more researchers at IDE and elsewhere are beginning to document some of the economic impacts as well. And I'm personally very optimistic about the ultimate effect on the economy. It's going to take some time, but the reason I'm optimistic is that AI, machine learning, is what economists call a general purpose technology. GPTs power most of the growth in our society. You go back to the first really amazing GPT, the steam engine, which ignited the Industrial Revolution. And GPTs have these characteristics. They're pervasive, they can be improved over time, and most importantly, they can spawn complementary innovations. So the first steam engine was used to pump water out of coal mines, but soon people used it, they realized they could use it to power factories, locomotives, steamships, all sorts of other processes. And that was part of what set off this cascade of complementary innovations. And later we had the internal combustion engine, which transformed much of the 20th century, America and other industrialized countries, electricity, of course, computers. And I think the big GPT of our era, the big general purpose technology of our era, is machine learning. And Demis Hassabis at Google DeepMind had a very ambitious motto. I don't know if your company's motto is equally ambitious, but their goal is to solve intelligence and then use that to, quote, solve all the other problems of the world. So that's about as general as you can get. And I want to stress we're very far from achieving this particular goal, as far as I know, unless they're doing it in secret. And they do publish their research, so I don't think they are. But we have made superhuman AI in a lot of other areas. And I showed you a couple of them a minute ago. And over time, this is a very general, very powerful technology that will allow us to solve many, if not all, of the other problems that we have in our society. But with that kind of superpower comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man, I think it was his uncle who actually said that. So these superpowers in things like image recognition, fraud detection, recommendation engines come with some significant responsibilities. And one of the ones we're going to talk about today, and that I get asked about all the time, is what's going to happen to all the jobs? Are humans going to go the way of horses? And Andy McAfee and I wrote an article talking about some of the similarities, but also some of the differences there. Horses, in fact, did ultimately get largely replaced by technology. Peak horse, if you want to call it that, was around 1922. So it wasn't the railroad, the iron horse, that replaced it, but once automobiles started kicking in, there was less and less need for horses. And today, I think if somebody gave me a free horse and said, you don't have to pay, you don't have to pay for the food or anything, you can use it to, I don't know, ride between classes or something, I just wouldn't have a whole lot of use for even a free horse. So the wages can keep going down, and still they're not good substitutes for the technologies that we have available today. Could that happen to humans? Well, I don't really think that's the right question. I think that there's actually no shortage of jobs that only humans can do. And when we look at the research, we see that if there are jobs that involve empathy or artistic creativity or cleaning the environment or scientific discovery or just simply anything involving the human touch, those are areas where machines really can't compare to what humans have to offer. So when I look around the planet today, I do not see a shortage of work. I don't see a shortage of things that only humans can do. I'm very glad that machines have these superhuman powers in a number of narrow areas, and if we play our cards right, that will free up human labor to address some of these other things where humans have a comparative advantage. But I'm very much looking forward to the discussions and panels today to see what some of the views and opinions are of some of the other experts, a lot of them a lot smarter than me, who have been thinking about these kinds of issues. That said, I don't want to say there are no challenges. There is a huge challenge that I've been particularly focused on, which has to do with not jobs per se, but income distribution. If you look through the economic textbooks, the fact is that while they do show that technological progress, in particular digital progress, makes the pie bigger, it's also important to understand that there's no economic law that says that everyone's going to benefit equally. In fact, there's no economic law that says everyone's going to benefit at all. It may be that some people benefit and other people don't. And the people who aren't benefiting aren't necessarily a small little percentage. In theory, it could be 50% or 80% of the population that doesn't participate. And in practice, sad to say, we've come pretty close to that. If you look at the data over the past few decades, median income has stagnated. Median, you'll recall, is the 50th percentile. That means about half the population, this blue line here, really hasn't seen any significant increase in income for a few decades now. Even though productivity continues to grow, I'd love it if it grew even faster, but the level of productivity is at an all-time high, and there are more millionaires and billionaires and more overall wealth in our society than ever before. But not everyone is participating. I think that's part of the issue here is how can we address those kinds of gaps. Now, why are we seeing this great decoupling, as Andy McAfee and I call it? Well, there are a number of reasons. Certainly some of the public policy, the tax policy, changes in unionization and culture. Trade, of course, is a big part of it. But most economists, not all, but the vast majority of economists agree that technology is really a big part of it, and particularly the way we use technology, because technology can be used in different ways. And you can see this, for instance, in research by Pascal Restrepo, David Otter, others, have shown that this black line here, the share of work in routine work, has dropped quite a bit. And those are the people who are most likely to be replaced by the recent generations of computers. And it's not just an economic change, it's something we see in lots of other aspects of society. Ann Case and her husband, Angus Deaton, two economists, have chronicled an alarming increase in what they call deaths from despair. Deaths from despair are deaths from suicide, drug use, alcoholism, depression, and this is not a map of the recent election. You've probably seen enough of those. But maybe it has something to do with it because people are despairing and they are turning to politics a little bit to try to address that. And we're seeing it, as I said, in economics, in other ways. And looking to the future, there's a new wave of technologies coming online, and we want to make sure that that doesn't lead to deaths from despair. In work I've done with Tom Mitchell at Carnegie Mellon and Daniel Rock, we can chronicle where machine learning is likely to have the biggest impacts. People are doing different kinds of jobs in the Midwest than they do in New York City, than they do in Texas. And by analyzing the types of tasks they are doing and comparing it to the types of tasks that machine learning is good at, we can create a map of where machine learning is likely to have the biggest impacts. This is more prospective, looking forward. And I want to stress we have some choices about how that plays out. It doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be job losses there. It doesn't also necessarily mean that this is going to happen instantaneously. Because in other work I did also with Daniel Rock and with Chad Severson at the University of Chicago, we found that there are so many complementary changes that are needed to really take advantage of these technologies. It's not simply a matter of switching on a machine learning system and you're in business. Almost every time it involves rethinking your business processes, reorganizing work, changing your incentive systems, training people with new skills. If you look at earlier technologies like electricity, I mentioned, it took about 20 to 30 years before factories were reinvented to take full advantage of that technology. I suspect it will happen faster, but the theory and the data show that you often have these J-curves. We call it a productivity J-curve when new technologies are introduced. Surprisingly, there's initially a dip in productivity as it's measured, And the reason for that is that people have to spend a lot of time rethinking how they're doing work, and all that effort into redesign doesn't immediately show up as increased output. But once they've rethought their businesses, then you get the upward part of the blue line in particular, and the other part of the J-curve kicks in. I suspect that in many industries and many companies, we're down in the downward part of that dip right now as there's a bit of chaos and reorganization going on. But again, this is a big part of what we're talking about today is the new business processes, the reorganization of work. And I'm looking forward to hearing what some of the speakers have to say about what kinds of changes we need to do. But ultimately, if we play our cards right, I do think the benefits of these technologies can be and should be vastly greater than the costs. But they will take time because technology alone is not enough. So what should we do? Well, there are a number of things. I run into people who are optimists and say, Eric, don't worry, every technology in the past has worked out. Living standards keep going up. And I can't really agree with them because we see the data that a lot of people aren't participating. And the theory, as I already showed you, is that there's no economic law that they will. I run into pessimists who say, Eric, this is hopeless. I mean, maybe we could compete with steam engines and internal combustion engines, but how can humans compete with superhuman artificial intelligence? And I disagree with them as well. I think that if we are able to create a world of more wealth with less work, shame on us if somehow that turns into bad news. The way our economy is currently structured, it is working out as bad news for people, but that's not a problem with the technology. That's a problem with how we are using the technology. The technology does not decide our future. We decide our future because technology, when it comes right down to it, is a tool. And it's a tool that can be used in lots of different ways. And if we use the tool to create more shared prosperity, we're going to be better off than if we use it to create more concentration of power or wealth or not benefit many of the people whose skills are no longer needed in the new economy. So that's one of the reasons that we have this workshop today, and it's one of the reasons we've put together something at the Initiative on the Digital Economy called the Inclusive Innovation Challenge. We are awarding $1 million, inspired very much by the DARPA Grand Challenge. But while the DARPA Grand Challenge was focusing on inventing new technologies, we decided to harness that creativity and ingenuity of people to think, how can we use the technologies to create more inclusive growth, more shared prosperity? And I've been just so heartened by the number of people who have entered that competition. We had over 800 entries, and I read quite a few of them. We have about 20 finalists who are going to be on the stage tonight at a gala, and we will be awarding those prizes. Honestly, almost any one of them I'd be very proud of as the grand winner. We will see who the final winner is. I don't know who that's going to be. But it's very inspiring to see that there are so many ways of using the technology to create a lot of inclusive growth, and it doesn't have to just be used to benefit the few. It can benefit the many. I'll just briefly mention a couple of the winners from past years. This is the third year we're doing it. One of them is Iora Health, or let me see, actually, one of them is 99 Degrees Custom. So this is a company that is reinventing textiles. Lowell, Massachusetts was once called the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution back in the 1800s. There were a lot of textile jobs there. Of course, those all disappeared and went to low-wage countries, and Lowell is not the most thriving town today. But 99 Degrees Custom is setting up shop there and bringing textiles back there, believe it or not. Not by having lower wages than they have in Bangladesh. Of course, that would never work. But by having higher skilled, more custom-designed clothing, more custom-designed textiles that pay higher wages and use advanced technologies. And we think that was a really impressive story, and we're happy to see them thriving and getting new funding. Another example is Iora Health. This is a company that has used technology to follow up with patients. As many of you know, when doctors make recommendations to patients about what they should be doing, what pills they should be taking, what they should be eating, a lot of us don't always follow up on those recommendations. And doctors don't always have the time, or let's face it, the skill to coach people and to stick with their program. So Iora Health has set up a platform, a digital platform, to have a layer of coaches that follow up with people. These coaches don't have to have advanced medical degrees, but they do have to be good, have high emotional intelligence. And that's a skill that a lot of people have, but they aren't always being fully utilized. And by putting in those coaches, what they found is people do follow up on their plans, and they do take the pills, and they have much higher compliance, and ends up leading to lower overall costs. But again, here's employing a set of people who previously weren't employed in the healthcare sector to create a lot of additional value. So ultimately, spreading the benefits of technology depends on, let me just see if we get this. There we go. Depends on using the technology in different ways. The same technology can be used to smash things, or it can be used to build things. And I think that the needed changes will not happen overnight. It will depend on all of us working very hard to think about how we want to use those technologies. And ultimately, the most powerful tools that we have, I think, are not simply hammers or computers. It's new ways of thinking about the world. So today, as you hear all these talks, think about how you can use those tools that you're getting from the panelists to change the world and help shape it in the direction that's aligned with your values. Thanks very much.